Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Catherine Cook. I'm the Vice President of Population and Aboriginal Health for the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority. And I'd like to welcome you all here this morning for our CEO Grand Rounds in Aboriginal Health, the gift of ceremony, Aboriginal peoples and wellness. This is one of the events that we host annually during the week of National Aboriginal Day, as a way of just raising awareness of some of the tremendous gifts that we have in our Aboriginal community. Aboriginal Day was established as an opportunity to celebrate the gifts that Aboriginal people have brought to Canada, and we've worked very hard to continue that tradition through our speaker series. Before we begin with the opening remarks, I'd like to invite Aboriginal Health Program Spiritual Cultural Care Provider, Betty Ross, to lead us in an opening prayer.
Hey, is this for me? Oh, I'm on microphone right now.
Now you can see how many there are.
Greetings, everyone. I'm so very honored to be here today to do an opening prayer for this very, very awesome event that we're going to be starting. We'll ask the Creator and the spiritual grandmothers and grandfathers to be with us today so that we'll be able to open our minds, our hearts, and take in the teachings that will be put forth today. And I will raise the sacred tobacco to the Creator. And at this time, I invite you to close your eyes and go deep within the recesses of your being. There you will see an ember of light. Focus on that ember of light and just be thankful for who you are, for where you are today in your journey on Mother Earth. Maybe you'd want to pray for yourself, your children, your grandchildren, and your relatives. We'll also pray for world peace as we open this ceremony in my language, which is Cree. I was saying to ginanas kumitnana nos kagitsigag. Winnipeg giseman to paguseni moak, paguseni mitag, the basiga poistawiag. Mina kita pesio signo kuminanak ni musuminanak. We started the basiga poistago ago kanos kagitsigag. Kitsige one gawiane mutsiga tegiseman to. Paguseni mo kita paskite naman ni mamit tuneni tsigan nan yawi namin ang tatsagunan. Kuwais kitan stuta mage kung gawitia. Kiskino magawiagan us kagitsigag. Mina kita witsewiag, mina kita saweni miag, katitu. Kisipanigo mo itegati to tiang tatuskewin nan. Kitsige kung gatuskata magutas kitinimino koutsi isaimanto. Kuwais paguseni mo agtatugisigag kita saweni tagusiag. Mina kita saweni tagusig tipinawen sa osemisnanak no seminanak kawiag utaskig. Mina kiskisiag kaispanikaski. Puite askig kaispanik. Kitinimino kinioge kitemagistag. Wawisina uskatsak. Kung minang kiskistutawana nagan uskagitsigisiga kisemanto. Wisto kita kiskenitagik. Eminenita ko taski et paski te panige wan kisige wan kiskeno magewin. Ego mano se sepe pagusene mo agete peisiga poistawiag kita saweni miak minagawet tiutna mage wan kita minuska ko ag nyawina gutse. Ego sane ise pagusene mo agan uskagi chigisiga kimamitse metnan kiseman to genanas ko metnan. Tatu kisiga mina tatu tepiska gawaste na moya ko taski. Ego sane kiseman to gisagi nan. Kagike, mina kagike. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. So just before we start, a bit of housekeeping. I want to acknowledge the telehealth sites that we have around the province. Brandon, Kanapawakpa, Flin Flon, Norway House, Pasquiac, Portage La Prairie, St. Teresa Point, Winkler Eden Mental Health Centre, Winnipeg, the MATC on Maryland, Winnipeg, the Misericordia Health Centre, the Riverview Health Centre, Seven Oaks General Hospital, 425 Elgin, 650 Main, 490 Hargrave, and Concordia. We will have a luncheon following the event here, and that will be up at the Joe Dope Concourse, and just so that you can prepare yourself for that. So please help me welcome our interim president and CEO of the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority, Lori Lamont.
Thank you, Catherine, and welcome. Thank you, Betty, for opening our session today with that prayer. I think this is day 19. I was just trying to do the math in my head. So I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to provide the opening remarks for the session today. And I want to thank you all for joining us here this afternoon. The CEO Grand Rounds in Aboriginal Health have been an important way of us sharing information and sharing stories from across the province that help to enhance our understanding and to allow us to learn in ways that will improve the way in which we provide care. Today's topic, the gift of ceremony and Aboriginal people's wellness, I think is a very important topic for us to be hearing about. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the CEO Grand Rounds in Aboriginal Health, they aim to provide cultural education for healthcare providers and our partner organizations to raise awareness and to establish culturally safe environments within our region. It's important for all of us to understand more about the people that we serve and how we can be more aware of their culture and their backgrounds in terms of how we approach care. It's often not the technical aspects of the care we provide that make the biggest difference to people. It's often the human interaction that we have, and through understanding, we can improve those interactions significantly. We have a high proportion of Aboriginal people as patients in our healthcare system here in Winnipeg, and it's vital that we build that capacity to provide better quality care that incorporates a more holistic approach. Today, we're going to learn more about Indigenous ceremonies and wellness, and to bridge that knowledge in our approaches to the care we provide. I'm really excited about our speaker this afternoon. As I've been interacting with people over the last few days, a number of people have commented to me how lucky we are to have him provide the session today, and how much people were either looking forward to hearing it or disappointed that they were unable to be with us today. So there's no pressure. Our presenter is well known for his thought-provoking contributions to conversations about Indigenous issues locally, nationally, and internationally. He said to me earlier that I needed to keep the introduction brief. And if he knew what he was asking for, he might have been concerned. Not one of my strengths is attention to detail. So I often make things so brief people can't really understand what I'm talking about. So I'll try to do a better job than that. Niigaan Weedam, James Sinclair is an Anishinaabe, originally from St. Peter's Indian Settlement near Selkirk, Manitoba, which is currently known as Little Peguis. He's an international commentator on Indigenous issues for outlets like Al Jazeera, The Guardian, and national broadcasters like CTV, and the Globe and Mail, and was named one of CBC Manitoba's top 40 under 40 in 2015. He's an award-winning writer, professor at the University of Manitoba, and editor of such books as The Winter We Danced, Voices of the Past and Future, and the Idle No More movement. So I'd like to turn the podium over to him, so please help me in welcoming Niigaan Sinclair.
Okay, is that on? Okay, so first off, I'm going to get a neck creak by having to stare at you like this. You didn't mention how many people were disappointed that they had to come. That's what I really want to hear. And so I see lots of faces out there that I know, even a former student or two out there. And so bonjour and denwe maganaduk, Niigaan webadam najnakas namagoshen dodem, St. Peter's and Donchi, Nimen wendam omayayan, bonjour namishomis, namijian nabents. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to spend time with you. Hopefully, you've given me a very big topic to cover, but I want to start by acknowledging that tobacco that was shared with Betty. So first off, you've got like the superstar row. You've got an amazing superstar row in the front here. I want you to know, I wish they would just speak instead of me. You get much more information, but there's a whole body of people who you can draw upon, I think, within your own staffing. And just looking at people who are around you, you have a great wealth of knowledge. I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about that tobacco. Oh, good. Is this for me? Is this, or, yeah? Okay, oh, yeah, we got matching sets. Okay. So, really? Is it, okay, Asema's for me? Yeah? Okay, good. Well, wonderful. So now I can talk about the Asema that I've received. Okay, so miigwech Asema. So thank you very much for the Asema, the tobacco that's been gifted to me. When you're gifted with tobacco, it's an incredible gift. It's a chance for life. So when you are gifted with tobacco's gotten this bum rap, and especially I'm like in a room of healthcare providers. So I realized that you're going to be like, okay, listen up here. But I'm not talking about the store-bought tobacco, Like I'm not talking about that tobacco that we now know full of tar and all of the additives and all of those things. I'm talking about the tobacco that is original to this territory that you'll often find in packages like this. And it's at times a little bit green. But Asema is a sacred medicine that was gifted to the Anishinaabe through the Wendat people, through our relationship through the Three Fires Confederacy. And when we traveled from the Abenaki territory, which was our original homelands out near the New York, Maine kind of area, and we traveled over hundreds of years, we traveled and eventually ended up right here in Manitoba. When we traveled, we met many people along the way. And when we would enter people's territory, we would spend time with them, and we would always bring them a gift. And when a gift always begats another gift. And I have a little, I hope I don't shatter anybody's perception, but there's no such thing as a gift without strings. And you know that when your auntie gives you an ugly sweater. You know that, right? Because you can't take that ugly sweater and throw it on the ground and go, Auntie, that sucks, right? Because what do you expect it to do with that ugly sweater? You have to put it on, right? And what you do when you receive a gift indicates to that other person your relationship. A gift is always an opportunity. A gift is an opportunity ultimately for a relationship, and a relationship that can produce life, or what we refer to as Minoba Madzuin, or the good life. Every gift begats an opportunity for that life. So when you receive this tobacco, this is an incredible gift because there's so much knowledge in this tobacco. There's so much you can learn about the world from this tobacco. And you don't have to be a chemist, although that helps. You don't have to be a sacred Medewin 8th degree medicinal spiritual person or a sun dancer. You don't have to be those things to understand the power of tobacco, although that helps too. You don't even have to, at times, speak the language, speak an indigenous language to fully understand, although that helps too. But the power of tobacco is in its growth. Anyone tried to grow tobacco ever? Again, oh, you have. Okay, you admitted that amongst healthcare providers. That's wonderful. Okay, good. So now, growing tobacco, as you know, is extremely difficult in this climate. It's almost impossible. You get a small seed. The only way which you could do it is to do those traditional practices of care and consideration. And that seed is about this big, eh? It's like a pepper. That's a great description. So it's the tiniest little seed, and it looks kind of like this. I want everybody to sort of look to see that's how small it is. Now, when you grow that tobacco, you have to take care and consideration that you put it in a space that has sun, that has space, that won't be stepped upon, won't be treaded upon. And then every day after work, you have to go home, you have to care for it. Sometimes if in this climate, you need a heat lamp, because it's going to take, how many months does it take to grow tobacco? sometimes as long as 6 months, especially in this climate, it can take, and to get a leaf about this big, right? So imagine now 3 to 6 months, how many hundreds of hours you've put into this sema. Every moment you're sort of taking care of it, and it's like a child, right? So you're raising that child, putting all that love and affection and care into that. And then after that, it grows into a leaf like this, and it takes a couple weeks to dry. Then you dry it, and then you get a tiny little pinch of tobacco. A leaf can create a tiny little pinch. This is probably how many leaves you think? It's probably 5, eh? Probably 5 or 6. Well, here's the thing. You do all those hours, care and consideration, and then at the end, you give it away. So what does that tell you? That tells you that this gift that I'm giving you is myself. The hundreds of hours, the blood, sweat, and tears literally that I put, everything I put into that tobacco, I'm gifting it to you. And my hope is that you put as much time and effort into what you give back to me as what I've given to you. And that's why in Ojibwe, what would you say when you receive, when I said, miigwech sema, what does miigwech mean? People often think it means thank you, right? That's not the actual translation, because miigwech comes from the verb miigwe, which means I give. So what you're actually saying is, I will give you back, or I will gift you back what you gifted to me. And that, my friends, is everything you need to know about ceremony. There's a lot more. But that's the basic principle of ceremony. Ceremony is about an exchange between living beings in the interest of life. It can be 2. It's always at least 2. Sometimes it's more, 3, 4. And it's even hard to sort of quantify it, because how do you qualify Gije Manado? Because Gije Manado, or what we refer to as the great mystery or the great spirit or the great essence, how do you quantify essence when essence is everything? So it's like for me to go, yeah, Gije Manado is a being, but yet Gije Manado is everything. It's like putting your foot in a river, right? So that you're encompassed with Gije Manado, the great spirit. The great spirit is everywhere. Okay, now that I've given you Tobacco 101, I hope that you think a little bit differently about tobacco when your relationship with it as healthcare providers, because the tobacco, I think, has been given this sort of unhealthy rap, but it is an essential component of Indigenous life. And particularly the tobacco that's grown in this territory, the organic, beautiful tobacco, which has, as we now know, medicinal qualities as much as it has other qualities. So pipes, I hope you think of differently. I see there's a pipe ceremony planned. I hope you think differently of that pipe ceremony and the tobacco that participates within that. So I want to tell you a story. So I'll try not to be too long, but if you know my family, and especially my father, we tend to talk a lot. So I'll try to be as concise as I can. But let me just get my time right here. What time is it right now? It's 20 after. And you want me to speak, Norm, how long do you want me to speak till? Quarter 2?
Yeah, I think that would be good.
5:45? Perfect. No. Okay, good. I'm ready. Okay, no, 1:45? Okay, so 25 minutes. Okay, so I've probably got more than 25 minutes, but I'll try to zoom it up. All right, I'm going to tell you guys about my last summer. Last summer, I went on a little walk with my family. Now, this year is Niigaan Nibents. I want you to meet my daughter, who is named Niigaan Nibents. Now, her name means a small bead of dancing water, like when you like if you took like a little bead of water, like not that, but that over here, that little bead of water. It's that little bead, and as it moves, that's what she is. She's that little bead of water that moves, and so that's her name. Now, she takes her name very seriously. Now, and traditional names are gifted to you often at your young point of life. Sometimes you get multiple names, but as an Anishinaabe, whenever you receive your name, whether it be when you're 80 or whether it be when you're 5, you're expected to live up to that name, or you're expected to inherit that name and make it a part of you. That gift that you've been given of that name identifies who you are. in relation to not just yourself, but also to everything around you, from the animals to the water to the spirits, and that the world then recognizes you as that name. So she's seen by the world as a small bead of dancing water. That's what she's seen as. And so she takes that name very seriously. And so, when she heard my mother had a dream about Lake Winnipeg and the problems in Lake Winnipeg. And if any of you, I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but she decided to go for a little walk. And that walk took my entire family on a journey around 3/4 of the lake. Now you can't travel the last quarter of the lake because there's no roads. But we tried to plan one anyways, and maybe doing it with canoe or something. But the actual journey around the lake involved my mother, my sisters, my entire family who traveled in and some of you will know my family. You'll know people, members of my family. But what we did is we did that to honor that word of Winnipeg. Now, Winnipeg is, of course, the name of our community, but it comes from two different words. So Winnat, which means dirty or cloudy, and the second is Nibik, which is waters. So now those two words together refer to a really sacred story about this territory. Because you know how you'll often hear this horrible thing from the anthropologists in the 1960s and 70s. They're like Aboriginal people never had science. They never did any of that kind of stuff like experiments. They never had scientific knowledge. Well, that's not true at all, because in the very name Winnipeg is the sacred knowledge of the history of this place. So this was once covered by a huge ocean called the Lake Agassiz, which was a glacier that melted. I'm giving you, grade 9 social studies. I hope you're not bored by it. But now within that lake were the very first inhabitants, or the very first citizens of Winnipeg. Because it's not that the water is muddy, it's what is in the water that makes it clouded. And that is, or what we refer to as atagib, or algae. Winnipeg is the inhabited home. The very first peoples, the very first beings that existed in this place were atagib. Atagib were the first beings in a house. Now, everybody ever made a party? Has anyone ever had a party? Yeah? So if you had a party, right? So what's the first, if you're the first person at a party, or you're hosting a party, what's your job before everybody gets there? Clean up, get the nachos ready, organize all the finger food, make sure everybody's got space to sit, and then make it nice and beautiful so that when the first beings come, you welcome them in. And Atagib were those first beings. Atagib were those beings that lived in that water and said, okay, I'm going to make this big, beautiful place for all of these beings who are going to come and join me at this party. And so Anishinaabe and Cree, when we looked upon the water, we went, oh, Winnipeg. Those were the beings that first are accepting us in. They're the very first beings that accepted in the animals and then the birds. And then all of the other beings, even down to the black flies and the mosquitoes, which we would wish would leave. They're like the people at the party that you just have to call the cops for. That's what those people are, right? Now the thing about the Great Lake, Great Lake Agassiz is it carved into the landscape an entire ecosystem that's now called the Lake Winnipeg watershed. So Lake Winnipeg watershed, and I'm going to show you a few different spots on that. The Lake Winnipeg watershed is a huge span system that went from a huge virtual ocean that covered, as you can see, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, all the way up to the Northwest Territories or Nunavut and down into the States, into Ontario, eventually created this, which was a valley system that ends up everything into Lake Winnipeg. So the best way to think about it is that Lake Winnipeg is like a funnel. I don't really have a funnel. I've already poured water on your table. And you're like, we'll never invite Sinclair here again. All right. So it's like a funnel. So it's like everything eventually drains into Lake Winnipeg, like a massive funnel. Well, the problem is that everything that has flowed into Lake Winnipeg has produced a massive ecological disaster. Specifically, pig fertilizer, oil, shale gas, other contaminants down to your shampoo that we use, the soap, and also sewage. That creates a massive algae floration that when ended up including the oil sands out in Alberta, the 36 fracking projects that live in western Manitoba. And a lot of people are always shocked going, oh my gosh, I didn't know there's 36 fracking projects here in Manitoba. Yep. There's over 100 in North and South Dakota. And not to mention all of the other issues that go out with the lakes and the waters, contaminated waters out in Ontario, and all the farmland. Now, when we have a massive ecological problem. And what the walk was to do, the Lake Winnipeg Water Walk, it was intended to create an awareness, but it was also a gift, just like tobacco. Now remember how tobacco makes you think, right? Tobacco can teach you. Because the action of walking around the lake may seem silly. A lot of people go like, why would you do that? I want us to think about what a walk means, what movement means, what the actions of women carrying water, women who carry that water in their bodies when they produce children, all of these different actions that happened during that Lake Winnipeg Water Walk, because I'm going to return to that at the end. So, because in the end, we are just talking about health. But I use this because this is an Indigenous concept of health. This is actually a body of knowledge that thinks about education, but I find it just as useful to think about health. Indigenous health incorporates every aspect of a person's life because ceremony is life. Everybody here a little while ago, I was involved in a little scuttle. I still am, actually. It's the thing about scuttles is they just kind of continue, especially when anybody hear about the smudging ban at a particularly Pentecostal church in the city? Well, I decided I had a little bit too much time on a Sunday afternoon, and I decided to read the Bible. And the Bible's all about smudging. They just call it incense. And so I decided to share my knowledge with the Pentecostals, and we've been in a sort of a 6-month-long discussion, we'll call it, around fragrances and materials in Egypt versus North America. Apparently the Egypt ones are okay and the North American ones are not okay. You can just imagine how I feel about that. But anyways, so my point is that understanding that ceremony is life. Now, the instance of what I'm describing as ceremony is those things which are the institutional kind. I guess I feel bad calling it institutional ceremonies, but the more formal ceremonies is probably what you're thinking about. So we're thinking about, let's say, a sunrise ceremony or a pipe ceremony, and I see there's a whole bunch of different ceremonies that you've got there. But for Indigenous peoples, and as someone who studies Indigenous peoples across North America, a ceremony is as straightforward as a walk on the earth, as playing with your grandchildren, as looking at the stars. A ceremony is every aspect of your life in which you engage another living being in creation, and you exchange knowledge, or ultimately gifts. Because everything is an opportunity for a gift-giving moment. Whenever you meet someone, and it looks very simple. It looks like this. There's a gift-giving moment. Another word for this is called a treaty. A gift-giving moment is an opportunity for a relationship. And so a ceremony is that in a formal sense because it's a pronouncement. It's an engagement. It's a formal engagement. So a good example would be a sunrise ceremony. There's a reason why when you do a sunrise ceremony, you face the east. I don't even know where the east is here, but I'll just pretend it's here. So you face the east because when you face that east where that sun comes up, you don't face the west and go like if the sun was coming up there, you'd be like, okay, hello sun, nice to see you. Because the sun would be like, okay, that's not great. The sun wants to see you, and you invite the sun into creation to be a part of your life. And so that's a more formal sort of way of thinking about ceremony, but I'm really talking about all of this. A ceremony is the extension of a relationship in order to participate within an act of minobomadzwin, or creating a good life. Because Indigenous health is always, this word holistic gets a kind of a bum rap too. It's often thought of as kind of everything, but it is really a law. It's the basic principle that everything is interconnected, and that when something over here happens, all of these things over here are affected. Now, that seems like New Age crystal kind of stuff, I know, because the New Age movement has made an entire industry off of thieving and stealing from Indigenous peoples and our teachings for years. And then kind of going, well, this is, the crystal knowledge and all this kind of stuff. And that's good. I'm encouraging for the idea of a holistic universe. But Indigenous peoples have now, for thousands and thousands of years, have considered this as a basic premise for law, in that what happens over here affects everyone. And you see it best in restorative justice models. In that you might be wondering, I just did a restorative justice circle between a teacher at a high school here in Winnipeg, and then the Grand Chief, the Assembly of Manitoba Grand Chief, who is suing him over some comments he made on Facebook. And and when they asked me to do this restorative justice circle, I said, well, I need an elder there, I need a woman there, I need a pipe carrier there. And they're like, the Grand Chief had no questions, but the questions from the teacher was, well, why do we need all these people in the room? Well, because those people are affected as much as anyone else. And that's the kind of way in which I want you to think about holistic health, in that when someone is affected physically, they're also affected not just within their community, within their family, within other people in their circles, but also their other parts. As you know, your mental, your spiritual side are also affected by your physical health. Now, why am I telling you all of this? This is stuff that you probably already know, especially as health practitioners, in that the reason why I'm telling you this is because for 148 years, every aspect, every legal policy that has been passed in relation to Indigenous peoples in this country, every single one has been about separating Indigenous peoples from their families, from their communities, from their land, and ultimately from their bodies. Every single one. And how do I know that? How can I make a blanket statement like that? Well, because every single policy has to relate, for Indigenous people, has to relate in some way to the Indian Act. And the Indian Act is the overseeing umbrella that has always been designed for assimilation, integration, and the eventual abolition of Indigenous peoples as a whole. A policy that has a foundation for assimilation and integration will always be one that will compromise the health of Indigenous peoples. So until we get rid of the Indian Act, and that's not easy either, because it's the only legal document in the country that identifies Indigenous peoples at all, until we get rid of the Indian Act, we're going to be in this constant series of affecting, compromising, and ultimately negatively influencing Indigenous people's health. And that's in the fabric of the country itself. So until we have a moment where we're brave enough to take 148 years and go, yeah, that's that, let's try to engage all the things that come out of it, well, this is the largest blemish, the largest issue facing us today. And if there's anything that you're inheriting right now, in June of 2015, you're inheriting this. This is the culmination of those 148 years. I could talk about the banning of ceremonies. I could talk about the pass system. I write all these curriculum documents. I could talk up to you about 150 different things that have happened in the country over 148 years. But if I could just sum it all up into this, residential school policy was the largest, most devastating, and influential experience for not just Indigenous peoples, but for non-Indigenous peoples. Because if you've read anything with the TRC national report, or the executive summary of the report, is that every single person in Canada is a survivor of those schools, has experienced the violence, the abuse, and experienced the outcome of those schools. Whether it be those children who were taught that they were uncivilized and heathens and pagans, or whether it be those children up the road, those Canadian children who are taught that they were superior, who are taught that to look down upon, who are taught maybe nothing at all. One of my great friends, Stuart Murray, who's a good friend of mine. I never thought I'd say a Conservative Party member would be a great friend of mine, by the way. But But Stuart Murray, who's a great friend of mine, he used to play hockey against residential school kids. And he never understood why his team was invited in for hot chocolate, but the other kids weren't. And he always thought, well, that was weird. Like, we just played hockey against these guys. Why don't we have hot chocolate together? And he always wondered why that was. And when he realized, because he had never been taught about residential schools, I was there when he realized why that was. And he just broke down over a little act like that. And that just shows you how impacted he was, as a sort of everyday Canadian impacted by that, and a very influential Canadian at that. Now, if you take all of those things, and I want to just show you I don't know if I have time for this, I'll just do it anyways. I want you just to look here at the outcomes of 148 years of policy. Now, this focuses just on reserve, and a lot of you, I think this will be useful for your work, but you could easily apply this to the north end of Winnipeg, very easily. So, let's see if my sound works here. Oh, look, that's my daughter again. There you go. I don't actually know how that works. How did that go? What? Do I have to turn off my PowerPoint? Is that what I have to do? Have to go like that? Or maybe it's just not going to let me do it. Okay, so my YouTube video is not going to work. I don't really know how that's... Okay, basically the video would be it just basically saying there's major issues. So instead of me just telling you all of the different issues, I was hoping you were going to see them, but basically these are the issues that have come out of residential schools and that both Canadians and Indigenous peoples are experiencing but as just a result of the residential schools. So poverty, massive poverty, 1,200 murder missing Indigenous women, consistent court battles between the federal government and Indigenous peoples. So here's a good example. Here's a little factoid for you. $65 million. That's a lot of money, eh? So $65 million is what's been spent or lost to fight Indigenous claims for the Cap Young Barracks. 48 million of that has been lost in terms of economic production for probably one of the most economically productive areas of the city. And 17 million has been spent in legal fees to fight Indigenous peoples. That's $65 million of whose money? My money and your money. That's been spent or lost for Indigenous peoples because Indigenous peoples want to open a gas station at the Cap Young Barracks and get land that's been owed to them. So the point of what I'm trying to say is that, as I now have to go back and open my things here. Let's see if it actually works. Okay. So is that we're all in this boat together, and we're all been deeply influenced by policies that have separated, and they have separated Indigenous peoples from the ceremonies in which they live. Now, it's not just about banning the potlatch and banning the Sundance, but it's about banning your ability to move. It's about banning your ability to have relationships with your family and your community and ultimately the land. Because when that bear song is sung, that song is not sung for the purposes of engaging other people. That song is sung so that we have a relationship with the bears. That song is sung also so that we have a relationship with all of those other bears that came before these bears. So Indigenous ceremony looks like this. It's an aspect of every part of your life, and that when you do this action, when you create a relationship, I just want you to look here, between humans and bears, everything else is benefited as a result. When in June 2015, someone gives me tobacco and creates a relationship with me, other peoples, like my daughter, are affected. Other peoples, like Winnipeg, like the water, like the Atagib, are affected. Because all of those things are about relationship-making mechanisms in an area. So ceremony is ultimately about sharing knowledge. It's about engaging and understanding another person. What did you call it when you started off here? You said about human relationships or something? You said our biggest successes, I don't remember who said it, but our biggest successes come in our human interactions. Well, that's a ceremony. That's what that is. A ceremony is about an engagement and understanding that knowledge is not just here, and this is my biggest struggle at university, is that when I ask my students what's knowledge, and they go, okay, it's this. Well, my point is that the true libraries, the true engagements, the true places of spiritual ceremony or worship or whatever you want to call it is here. Here are the places that we have to be in touch with for there to be a true sense of positive, encouraging, holistic health. And that we have to have the ability to have a healthy environment. We have to have the ability to be able to read that snow, to hear the crackling of that ice, to read what's written onto the earth itself. That's the petriforms of Manitoba, by the way, in the White Show. One of the original names of this place. There's two names, Manitoba and Manitowabo. There's nothing more Manitoba than having two names for something. It's very true, actually, if you know. So then being able to gauge the tree. So my students say, well, isn't this where I do my papers? And I go, yeah, but here too. Because this is only a fragment. This is such a small sample of knowledge. It's such a small piece of knowledge is here. The true knowledge is here. Or not the true knowledge, the more vast knowledge is there. There's so much to learn from this place, but yet we build huge institutions for this place. And we do multi-billion-dollar commitments. We spend so much of our time on this. And that ultimately these problems, all of these things are symptoms of 148 years of separating, of breaking the bonds of ceremony. That when we see this, when we begin to engage that these things matter, that when you're sitting there with that patient or with that community member, and they care deeply about receiving tobacco, you now understand a little bit more why. And you also understand why it's important that you have a relationship that perhaps takes place outside, or that relationship can also take place with a member of their family that seemingly might compromise something like privacy. So then how do you engage that? How do you begin to think about the challenge that presents you as a healthcare practitioner? So for me, I was driving over here and I was thinking about, okay, so if ceremony is knowledge, how do I explain ceremony? Well, I can boil it down to 4 main answers, and it's from this guy. So this guy's basically taught me, he's a funny-looking guy. I don't know who he is, but he's taught me a lot in this. I don't tell him that he's taught me a lot, or I'll never hear the end of it. But this guy, he says that there's 4 main purposes for education. So when you have any educational experience, the school system, when he speaks to school systems, he says, this is what you should be teaching kids, these 4 questions. So the 4 questions are, who am I? Why am I here? Who can help me? And then where am I going? Well, if I were to boil down to you the sunrise ceremony of why do we greet that sun with a song and with water, why do we do that? Well, it's these 4 questions. Why is tobacco passed? Why is there a name given for my daughter when she was 4? Or actually after when she was born, but when she was 4, she talked about it. Why do we have that pipe ceremony or a sweat lodge? But then also, why do we go for a walk? Why do you play with your grandchildren? Why do you care about having a community meeting? Well, these 4 questions are at the heart of why that ceremony is taking place. And so the more that we think about Indigenous ceremony like this, but I can even break it down for you in terms of tradition. So there's 2 main words that we use to describe the interconnectedness between all things. And those 2 words are Enawendowin and Wawiyak. And basically that Enawendowin is that connection. So Enawendowin is the connection that you share with people. Enawendowin is that bond that you've created when you share gifts. But yet Wawiyak is the idea that everything has this, it's like the party. everybody's invited to the party, but everybody's got to make space for one another. And when everybody's in the party, it's a complete system. Everybody has a place, even the black flies and the mosquitoes. Even though we don't really, we don't want them there, maybe we can just keep them over there, right? But now, Indigenous peoples knew this for thousands of years in this territory. And what I also like to say is that not only did we have science, but we also wrote everything down. So you'll hear this phrase out there, especially I'm giving anthropology a bad rap today, but you'll hear this phrase that Indigenous people never had writing systems. Well, we absolutely did. We wrote things down all the time. And that when Europeans came, we explained to them, this is a map from 1817, 1817 is the Selkirk Treaty, 1806, by a chief called Chewapiwati. Actually, he was a traveler, and he explained to Peter Fiddler. Peter Fiddler said, okay, so you're in the Paw, right? And how do you get home? So it's Cumberland House in those days. How do you get home? Well, he said, well, I can go one of three ways. I can go this way, and I can go this way, I can go this way. And here's Lake Winnipeg over here. Now here's the three ways I can travel, because this is the way the current goes, and I can end up in Split Lake. Well, Manitoba Hydro has been building these dams, and one of the outcomes of the dams is that it freezes up all of the water in Lake Winnipeg, the outflow of the water, so that the water in Lake Winnipeg sits there like a soup, and more algae is produced. Well, and one of the arguments is that Indigenous peoples don't have a seat at the table because they didn't have any knowledge about the water flow. They didn't have things like scientifics. They didn't have scientists that could argue things. And so they don't have claims to things like water. Well, my point is, yeah, we did. Darn rights we did. And we wrote it down too, because this was a first contact. This was a Chewapiwati was explaining to Peter Fiddler, and he was saying, yeah, absolutely, water flows this way. And when I meet people along the way, these are all the families I meet along the way, and that water flow affects family relationships. So that when you build a dam right here, you directly disconnect the peoples that live along that river. And so it is an Aboriginal claim. It is a right. It is a right because a right to life means a right to relationships. And so yeah, Aboriginal people should be at the table when there's a dam built. Absolutely. Yes, Manitoba Hydro, and I've testified in court over this. Now, one of the great moments that we can think about is the opportunity that we live in today. So, a couple years ago, there was a bunch of young people, young women in particular, who started a little movement called Idle No More. Now, Idle No More spread across literally the nation, but also the world. And one of the groups that was engaged in that was the Nishiya Walkers, who were, some young men, 13 young men who traveled 1,400 kilometers. Now, unfortunately, I know my video is not going to work. But has anyone ever seen what was the major event? You can try to see them there. What was the major event that we saw in Winnipeg here? It took place at Polo Park and Portage Place. It was a round dance, right? How many people have been in round dance in your lifetime? Yeah? Okay, so what's round dance? I'm going to show you how it starts. So I'm not actually going to round dance, so don't worry. I saw you tense up. You're like, he's drawn upon me 3 times. I know he's going to do it again. Well, how does a round dance start? And a wenduin. And a wenduin. That's how it's produced. It's produced exactly the way that you gave me tobacco. You gifted me that relationship. And that's how that ceremony is started. It starts just like this. Hey, let's start this dance, right? Now, here's the thing. Now, when you connect with another person, like the round dance is like the messiest thing in the whole world, right? Because you're like, for about a minute, I see all you smiling because you're like, no way. Like, it's like, oh, I got one person who's like, and then you got one other people who are like, whoa, that's Norm over there. Norm's like that, so. Anyways, but like, so, but after about 30 seconds, you sort of figure each other out, right? And then you're like, okay, and then you mess it up, and then you figure it out again. But then eventually, what is the goal of the round dance? After 2 people, what's the goal of the round dance? Is to eventually connect so that you make an entire circle. Another word for that is wawayak, an entire complete system where everything has a place. And that's how that ceremony goes. Now, when people were creating Idle No More, they were trying to stop 2 things. They were starting to have a whole bunch of things. But 2 things in particular. The first was the removal of the protection of water. And the second was the removal of First Nations territory through an unjust leasing program so that a pipeline could be built. That's why that movement started by those 4 young women. One of them was my student. And so when those young women started that movement, I don't know more, where did they hold these dances at? A mall. What is a mall? Well, let me tell you, it's a place of have and have-nots. How do I know? Go to Claire's. That's where my daughter is like, I want that. Now I have it. I'm going to show all my friends that I have it. Yes, you've all been to Claire's, obviously. Right? Now, that's what a mall is. A mall is a place of profit, and ultimately it is the creation of wealth. It's the creation of the removal of wealth from territory and the commodification of it. It is the 148 years of the removal of First Nations territory, the removal of people's into residential schools, the removal of communities and families, and ultimately the removal of our bodies. That's what is indemnified within that mall. But yet for 15 minutes at a time, 4 Indigenous women invited everyone. It wasn't just for Indigenous people, but for other people to dance. And the video I was going to show you was that in Saskatoon on December 21st, I think, or 17th, no, December 17th, 2012. 4,000 people. It's amazing to watch. Look at it if you get a chance. 4,000 people danced together, and they created Wawayak. And they recreated 148 years of separation. And that Indigenous peoples turned to everyday Canadians and said, we are relatives. Let's revisit that relationship. No one's going to separate us now. We want something different. We can be something different. And that's what the Nishi'i Walkers did. That's what these guys did. Now, this all goes back to Lake Winnipeg, right? So Lake Winnipeg's very sick. And we have an opportunity now to create not health for Indigenous peoples, although that will come along, but for all of us. Because there's areas in Manitoba where you can light the water on fire. There's areas where you can't drink. And there's areas where you can't swim. Anyone have a cottage out in Lake Winnipeg where the algae, or the atagib, is at such a high point? Well, that's Winnipeg. That is the dirty water, the most dirtiest of all, or the most clouded that it can be, because of what we've done, because of those things we've put into the earth, the things that ultimately culminate in the mall. But like the mall, we can remake Lake Winnipeg if we work hard enough, if we spend enough time, if we engage ourselves in ceremony, and we think about what ceremony teaches us. We can think about how relationships can produce Minoba Madzuin, or the beautiful life. And I know this because I have a little girl whose name represents that life. The movement, the tiny little movement of the tiniest little bit of that water, or the atagib that lives within that water. And so we're walking along the highway. And so last August, we're walking along the August long weekend. Remember August? What does everybody do August long weekend? Everyone's heading up to the beach, right? Or heading up to their cottage, right? It's the hottest time of summer. So we're walking along 59 highway. And there's I counted in about 15 minutes, 300 cars. It's vroom, vroom, vroom. And my little, so what happened is that there was always have to be a woman that would carry the water, and then whoever walked with her, whether it be a man or a woman, would carry that eagle staff to honor and to protect and to, the teachings of the eagle. It's all about being able to see the wide picture, right? But so a woman, young or old, so we had grandmothers carry that water around the lake, and they were carrying that lake, and that water could never stop moving. And so my daughter carried that water out of the 1,056 kilometers. She carried it for 3 kilometers by herself on the side of a highway, and she did that for you. She did that for herself, but also for you. So people could be aware of, and there's lots of people who stop. There's lots of great stories. I want to tell you just one great story. So we were walking along, and then suddenly this car stopped in front of us, and this woman who, jumped out of her car, ran back to us, gave us $50, and then ran back to her car, and then drove away. And we're like, okay, that's a form of activism. Yeah, good. But we had many, many other people who would stop their car and they would join us. And there was a few people here. Did you guys join? Yes, we had lots of people who joined along the way. I had people who would leave me gifts on the side of the highway. They left gifts of medicine, of sage, and I'd be walking along, and I'd be like, hey, cool, and I'd be walking along, you know. And so there'd be some really beautiful things that would happen, but this is the most beautiful thing that happened the entire journey for me anyways. There's lots of really cool things that happened. You could ask my family about them, but the really cool thing that happened for me was we're walking along that highway, and I was starting to feel really upset, because these 300 cars that passed us by were spraying up rocks into our faces, and I was like trying to protect my daughter, and I was carrying that eagle staff, and you know, she was like, Daddy, I started getting all grumpy, I probably was just a little bit hangry, you know what I mean, hungry. But I started getting grumpy, and she's like, Daddy, what's wrong? Like, why are you grumpy? And I said, well, I don't know, like, I'm not, you know, look at all these cars that are going past. Like they're not even really, nobody really cares that we're doing this. And so my daughter's 8. And so she says to me, she goes, oh, Daddy, they care. And I said, well, they don't care. They're just like driving by. And she says, Daddy, they see us. And if they see us, they'll know. And I say, well, how will they know? And she says, Lake Winnipeg is telling them. And so I want to say miigwech, and thank you very much for inviting me to come and speak to you. And I hope that I can answer any questions that you have along the way. But miigwech for spending time with me.
So thank you so much, Niigaan. We're going to open the floor for questions. We do have a bit of time. There are microphones along the side, and if you have a question, please proceed to the microphone. Everybody's shy.
Shy. By the way, is that taping me right there? That little red light right there? Yeah? Okay.
That's a telehealth.
Or is that like closed circuit to some?
To all of the telehealth sites.
I was like looking at that red light, and I didn't want to ask in the middle.
Hello.
Hello, is that one of our telehealth sites?
Yeah, it's Tina Kitchkisik from Chinupapa, Dakota Nation.
Okay.
We're 3 hours southwest of Winnipeg.
Go ahead, Tina.
We just wanted to. Hello.
Go ahead, Tina.
We wanted to know the name of the video.
Oh, okay.
On YouTube.
Which one do you want? Do you want the? There was the first one, which is called Aboriginal Issues in Canada, but there's a whole bunch of them. I can give you the link if you want after. But the second one is for the 4,000 people round dancing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the cool one. Type in one more time Saskatoon. And go to the second minute, because there's a whole kind of preamble to it. But go to the second minute. And keep watching till you see the little guy. He's about 6 years old, and he takes over the drum circle. It's worth it. So, unfortunately, you guys don't get to see any of it. I just described it to you. But anyways,
Now we'll all look.
you'll all look it up. There you go. Look it up. So.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I'd like to ask Lori Lamont, where is she, to come up and provide some closing remarks, and then following that, Betty will lead us in a closing prayer before we go for our lunch.
Thank you. I'd like to specifically thank Niigaan for speaking with us today, and thank you all for being here to share the experience with us.
Handshake.
I often speak about relationships, and now I'm going to start thinking about what the ceremony is behind those relationships, because I think in healthcare, again and again, it is the giving of our time and talent to the people who we serve, but it's also what we get back from those people as well. I hope that you can all take what you heard today and start to think about ways in which you can incorporate it into your day-to-day lives, but also in the day-to-day work that you do here in the healthcare system. It's Aboriginal Awareness Week here in the health region, and there are many, many celebrations. We've already had a couple this week, and there are more planned. And so please take a look at the posters that you'll see posted throughout the health region, but very specifically here at the HSC campus on Friday, there's a number of events planned, and I really encourage as many of you as possible to take part in those. So once again, I'd like to thank the Aboriginal Health Services team for planning the events and making them a very important part of our lives all the time, but particularly this week. And thank you to Dr. Cook for her leadership in this area.
So Betty will provide us with some closing words, and then we'll exit up to the light lunch upstairs. And I do believe Niigaan will be joining us for some food, so he will be available for some questions up there. I think.
Gusani, mitene. Kinanas ko mitna o gino ka Niigaan istamek uma quest atsemun kiskino magewin. We are very, very grateful for the leaders today that put on such a wonderful teaching about connection, about the sacred tobacco. I'm very honored to be here today. And in a way, we are in our, how do you say that? It's just so very, very powerful in a way that Mother Earth is just trembling with joy today. That song came to me. I have quite a number of songs that came from spiritual grandmothers, grandfathers. They're not of this world. But that's one of them, that the earth is just trembling with joy today. And I hope it's going to vibrate all over this world. So again, at this time, thank you, Egusani Kinanaskumit now. And I invite you to close your eyes, to go deep within the recesses of your being. There you will see an ember of light, because we are all spiritual beings. Focus on that ember of light. Be thankful for who you are, for where you are today. That was great, awesome 4 teachings that we received today. Be thankful for your children, your grandchildren that are loaned to us from the Creator. Be thankful for our relatives, our family members, and the work that we do on behalf of our patients, Winnipeg Regional Health Authority. I'll also pray for world peace as we close the ceremony. Awe gusani, kisemantu. Mitune, nanas kumana nanuskagi sigisigag, menugisigag. Mitune nanas kumunan, minapego pagitatamuak, utaskig, menupagitatamuak, minemenupmuteagaskig. Witsewinan kisemantu. Aga kitawani kiskisyak, umagagisikis kinoma, kagisikis kinoma gawiak, anus kagitsikisiyak. Koes kita muteak, ni Niigaan kita koikiske nemiswak. Ako minane magagige sagiwewin, mina gagige punin itamagewin. Kita gikiskakuak, mina. Kita isikis kinoma, tikisikis kinomwagok, nto temenanak, nsosimis nanak, wawis minanusi minanak. Minoyawin igisi. Mituni ginanas kumitnan, tatu gisiga kawaste na mawiyak, minatatu tipiskaw, kawaste na mawiyak utaskik. Gusani gisemantu. Ako ani mani ettikipaige paniganus kagitsigisiga kagipegisiga pawistawiyak, mituni ginanas kumitnan, gimamitsimitnan. Ano guminanak ni musuminanak isto ginanas kumitnan, gimamitsimitnan, anus kagitsigisiga. Witsewinan tatugisiga kawigas tausonigiskisiak, tanto magapmutiak, minatantega utsiak, minatantega titutiak utaskik. kusani nanaskumitnan. Kagenege kon gawi ako taski kimaskigi mamina kikiskeno magewina. Taisemeno ako taski kapmatsiak. Kusani kisemantu kisagitnan. Kusani nukuminanak musuminanak kisagitnan. Kageke mina kageke. Amen. Ekusi.
Please join us upstairs.